Good morning. I've just started a minute early, so I'll just give it a minute before I start properly. Let's try and... Morning there. Oh, 3 people are dialed in. I'm just going to give it just another minute, guys, just till it gets to 10:30, and then I'm going to start properly. 10, 12 people. Excellent. 14. 16, nearly 10:30, just give it another minute or two. Well, at 10:30, there we go. So, morning everybody. My name is Oliver Wright. So a big thanks to CameraWorld and Canon for inviting me to talk to you this morning on this Facebook Live event. So I got asked if I would do two separate sessions. Morning there, Paul. So we've got today's session where we're going to sort of talk about macro basics, and we're going to talk we're going to do some photography of soap films, and then I'm going to be doing another session on the 9th of June at the same time, and we're going to go through macro stacking on that one. So just to cover a few things off first, so I will have CameraWorld should be on the Facebook Live as well, so they should help me sort of field any questions. As I see, because I am streaming off my phone in my front room, so anything can happen, and there's going to be certain times when I'm looking at the phone like I am now, and if sort of a technical question pops up, I will try to answer it. I know CameraWorld will also be helping me out on that front as well. So we will sort of try to answer questions as we go, but if there's any questions we miss, we can look at it retrospectively as well, and we'll sort of try to answer questions, and you'll get a notification. Also, because this is my front room, if the postman arrives, my dog's going to start barking, you know, anything can happen. Just on one word of caution as well, when I did one of these the other week, my app on my phone crashed, so I ended up leaving. So if I just sort of disappear from the event, that's what's happened, and I would set up another one. So just leave that one and join the next one. But I would contact CameraWorld as well, so they would let you know. So we are going to basically sort of going to go through an end-to-end process of how to get images like this, which is a macro photograph of a soap film. So I will sort of talk you through all of the equipment. Pretty much all the stuff I'm going to use is stuff that can be sort of found in a house. The idea being that you don't really need to get loads of equipment to do this. And if I move that a little bit closer, you can get some really cool psychedelic type images with soap films. The more traditional type photography is tends to be more of soap bubbles. That's what people sort of, and that's what I started on when I started doing some sort of home macro photography. I focused on soap bubbles. But when you photograph soap bubbles, you know, a bubble is a 3-dimensional object. And I don't know how many of you have done that much macro photography, but when you do macro photography, you tend to have a very shallow depth of field. So what I mean by depth of field is how much of the image is in focus. And because a bubble, you know, it's 3-dimensional, it has a front of a bubble and a back of a bubble. When you're using a macro lens, it's really hard to get anything other than a very slim sliver of the bubble in focus. While if you photograph soap films, you're photographing something which is flat. So you can get these really cool psychedelic type patterns, and you can get a lot more of it in focus than you can if you're photographing soap films. And I mean, and that leads me on to one of the sort of the key things with macro photography. Let me just grab my camera. So for this demonstration, I'm going to be using a Canon 5D Mark IV with a 100mm Canon 100mm macro lens attached. Now you can use any cameras when you're doing this. you know, if you don't have a macro lens, you can do this without a macro lens as well. You could do it with a regular lens, and you could do it with extension tubes. These are extension tubes. Now, if you were to do that, I've got sort of some examples here. So here we've got what I'm going to put the soap film in, which is, I'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but it's just a pipe cleaner. So if you're sort of doing this with a lens where you can't get that sort of close to the subject because it's not a macro lens, your image is going to more come out like something like this. But that's all right, because that in itself can make an interesting image. But you can also sort of crop into the image, so you could get away from the pipe cleaner being in view. But I'll talk to you a bit as well about what's the easiest way of getting really close to the actual image. But one of the key things with macro photography is the thing which impacts your depth of field the most, i.e. how much of a subject is in focus, is how close, what's the sort of nearest focusing distance that you're focusing on. So for example, if you're out doing landscape photography and you're focusing on a tree which is sort of like 50 meters away, and then you want the sky to be in focus, obviously that is a huge depth of field that's required for that. But because the tree is 50 meters away in the distance, your depth of field automatically is huge. And the closer the subject is to the lens, the narrower that depth of field comes, even if you keep all of the other settings the same. Which is why when you're doing macro photography, and the minimum focusing distance on this lens is 30 centimeters away from the sensor, so it's about here, something like that. When I'm that close, my depth of field, even if I'm shooting at something like f9, which traditionally would give you a big depth of field, your depth of field comes down to just a sliver. So that's why with macro photography, depth of field is really, really important. And that's why on the other session, the session that we're going to do on the 9th of June, we're going to talk about stacking, because stacking is something you can do to sort of increase the depth of field. But I won't cover that much more about stacking now, because that's for the 9th of June. But for a subject like this anyway, we'll see once we get the soap film set up, the soap does not stay still. I mean, it's going to be moving around, bubbling all over the place, and can make really interesting psychedelic videos. But therefore stacking is not an option anyway, because you'll see when I try using my phone to do a video of what the soap film is actually doing, you'll see it's just moving all over the place, and it's quite quick. Which then leads me on to another key thing you need to think about when you're doing macro photography, or any photography really, is nearly always my starting position is, what shutter speed do I need for this image to be sharp? That's nearly always my sort of leading thought process when I'm doing photography. Now, there are times when you don't need to think about that. So I don't know, say if I was doing some photography on my desk, say for example I have this, which is maybe what I will use when we do the stacking one. So I've got a little J feather here. I have a number of different little things I sort of practice photography on. J feathers are good, Lego men, anything like that. And if I was having that set up on the desk and I was using a tripod, so there was no movement at all, then shutter speed obviously becomes much less of an issue. But what I have found in the real world, shutter speed is nearly always an issue. So yeah, my key starting point when we start doing the demonstration in the little homemade studio bit I've just made, which is just down there, is going to be shutter speed. So if this stuff is moving around, what shutter speed am I going to need to make sure that that's sharp? My guess is probably something around 100th of a second, 150th of a second, but we'll do some test shots and have a look. It all literally depends how much that's moving. One thing I'm just going to mention now as well, I will hopefully mention at the end, but just in case I forget, I'm going to mention it now. So what we're going to be doing is CameraWorld is sort of going to be hosting a competition on the back of this, so everybody sort of can have a go at doing these soap film photographs themselves. and CameraWorld will sort of set up a Facebook post where people can post their images, and they're going to run a really cool competition. So there'll be a first, second and third place, and there will be CameraWorld vouchers for that. So there'll be a £50, £30 and £20 respectively camera vouchers for the first, second and third prizes. So yeah, definitely a good incentive to practice this. But one of the other things I've found as well is the more I have practiced macro photography at home, you know, we're sort of locked down, we're not maybe wanting to go out as much as normal, it's a really good time to sort of practice some sort of kitchen, desktop type photography, because one thing I found is the more I have practiced skills indoors, the more I've got to understand them. And then when I'm outside and I might be, you know, chasing jumping spiders or whatever, the more all of those lessons I learned indoors become transferable. So, cool. Let me talk you through what I need to make all of this work. Because obviously getting from this image here to actually taking that image requires a number of different things, but I have tried to you know, you could do this with a whole load of studio lights and complex setup, but I know not all of us are going to have that at home, so I've just done something really simple. So I'm just going to give you a little peek of the studio setup down there without, so I need to readjust the tripod to do it properly, but literally I'm going to be using a bedside lamp. In fact, let me just take this off and show you properly. That's going to work better. So yeah, so this is the studio setup. So it's literally a couple of coffee tables. Let's go back a bit. Yeah, a couple of coffee tables, some books, and then this bit is really key. So I've got some books there, and also note I have got this black card as the background. That's going to be really important for all of the colours to show. And then in between, so I've got yeah, my bedside lamp. I moved that down this morning, and in between the lamp and this is the area where we're going to do the photography just here. Is this diffusion paper. Now that is an absolutely key part, and by diffusion paper, that's basically it's anything which just helps diffuse the light from the bulb. So you could use a packaging, your sort of bubble wrap type stuff, baking paper, anything like that, anything which is going to diffuse the light. And what that's going to do is where the bedside lamp is going to be shining down, that's going to hit that diffusion paper, and it's going to spread all of that light out really nice and evenly. Without putting some of that diffusion paper in, it becomes very difficult, because the light from the lamp it's just coming from one source. So that diffusion paper spreads all of that light out, and it makes this much easier. The black background, I've just got a big piece of card there, but it can be, be a big piece of card. It could be a black t-shirt hanging off a chair, could be, but it just wants to be a matte black background. That's going to be really key as well. The books, they're unimportant. They can be any books. So my selection there is a whole selection of the Wainwrights, and then a whole load of Ian Banks books on the other side. But yeah, books can be anything. So the other bits we're going to need. So I have a pack of pipe cleaners here, which you can get from sort of craft shops, tobacconists, anything like that. And literally what I did, and the reason pipe cleaners are much better than just wire, is if you use just wire, when we dip this in the soap solution, there's nothing for the soap solution to sort of stay on. But with the pipe cleaners, the solution soaks into that, and the bubbles will last much longer. Now when I first tried doing this, I used one pipe cleaner, and I ended up with a very little square, which wasn't really good enough. So I'm going to get two pipe cleaners, I'm literally gonna twist them together like that. And then I am going to roughly, hopefully, make a square. I might be back doing that one. Now, you sort of want to think about, I think Lee Childs would do, Paul. Yeah, like I say, any book. So, there you go. I have made a square out of pipe cleaners. Now, if you don't have access to pipe cleaners, you could use wire, but you would have to sort of maybe cut some thin fabric round and make that go around the wire. So it's something for the solution just to sort of bed into. But that's basically all you need to do. But so you're going to provide a frame for the soap film to fit in. Now, but what is key is that you make a square which is going to be big enough, because if you make it too small, depending on what type of lens you're using. So if you think about it from in terms of, if I'm using a 1:1 macro lens, which this one is, what that basically means is you can get you can have a sort of 1:1 replication of what's in front of you onto the sensor. So if I make this smaller than the camera sensor is going to be, I'm never actually going to be able to fully fill the frame with the soap film. There's, this would be in view. And then if you're not using a macro lens, so if you're using a lens which sort of does 1:2, for example, so then this would need to be twice as big as a sensor for you to just have soap film. But like I say, if you can't get it to do that, and this is going to be in the image, that in itself is, is not the end of the world. It just means you would have to crop into it. So again, it would be a bit like one of these. So there you've got the pipe cleaner is going around the edge of the frame. But you could crop into it, that's not going to be a problem. Now, another thing which does impact the depth of field is I'm going to be using a full frame camera, which gives me, it's a bigger sensor. So what that does is it gives you a sort of an apparent shallower depth of field. So if you were using a smaller sensor, that's going to give you an apparent bigger depth of field. So it's actually going to be easier to get the soap film, more of a soap film in focus. I think you need the rigidness. It's more about how close you can get to the subject. So for example, if I stuck extension tubes onto my macro lens, that would reduce the minimum focusing on the camera lens, would allow me to get closer to the soap film, so therefore it would be more magnified. So I would get even closer to the subject, it would be more magnified, but in doing that, you get an even shallower depth of field again, because you've come closer and closer to the subject, and the closer you are to the subject, the shallower the depth of field. That's a key to macro. So the further you are away from the soap film, the smaller this is going to become in the photograph, but the bigger your depth of field. So depth of field and closeness to subject is a real key fundamental to macro photography. And if I shuffle my tripod around just so you can see this image which is behind me, so this great big damselfly here, which is really huge, that is an image which I did stack. So I was very close to the subject. It's a huge image, all covered in dewdrops first thing on the morning. There's no way I could have got that much of the image in focus on a single image. So that's a stacked image. But yeah, I keep going back into stacking. I'm going to leave stacking alone because we're not going to be doing that today. So other key things that we need some bubble mix. So this is just Mr. Bubbles bubble mix, but you can also just use washing up liquid. It's basically anything which is going to produce a soap film. Now this stuff, glycerin, which you can just get at any pharmacist. This is, I add some of this to the bubble mix, and it basically, all it does is it thickens up the bubble mix, and it means the bubbles last a little bit longer. So just glycerine. Like I say, you can buy it from any chemist. It's not related to nitroglycerine or anything, so yeah, it's totally fine. And I'm going to use, I'm just going to use a plate to mix up the bubble mix, and then I'm going to put my frame into there, let that all soak in, and then we should be right. Yeah, the one last other thing is I use these type of clamps. But basically all I'm going to do is, once I've got the soap film in there, I'm going to put that into a clamp like that, and then the clamp will go onto the little staging area. Simple as that. So I think I've covered everything. Camera, but I had left one little bit out there. So I am going to be using a tripod. I mean, you could do this without a tripod, but a tripod is going to make it a little bit easier. So once I've got my soap film set up there, down there, the diffusion light back on, etc., I'll try and get the tripod into the right position and do the photography. Like I say, it's not essential a tripod, but it is going to make life a little bit easier. I mean, here I've got a Benro Mac-free tripod, an Enduro 5-way head, which is really good for my macro. It's quite a technical head. It allows you to move in 5 different directions. And I am going to use a macro rail on this as well. So this is a Nova Flex Castel L. Again, when I had done this in the past, I had not used a macro rail. I'm more doing it just because it's going to make it easier for me this morning. And I'm talking to you guys and doing this live streaming off my phone, so anything I can do just to make it a little bit easier is going to be better. But what the macro rail does is, once I've got the camera attached onto there, and it just attaches on with this little button, it just means I can fine control moving the camera backwards and forwards. But like I said, it's not essential at all. It's just going to make life a lot easier for me as I'm doing this presentation. So I need to pick everything up, move myself down here and readjust this tripod. Is that going to give us... No, need to come down lower again. And still a bit lower. Oh, nearly on the blooming floor here. Right, cool. That looks about right. So you can clearly see the setup here. 2 lots of books, lamp, black background. I'm going to just stick that diffusion paper back in there. Now this is a low energy bulb, so it doesn't really produce any heat. But obviously, if you I would only do it with a low energy bulb because you don't want to introduce any risks as such. So just going to grab one of a book, stick that on there. Right. Grab a camera. I'll come back to camera settings once to start with, I'm just going to start getting the film itself working, and then we will come back to the camera. Light on there. So, literally just going to mix some bubble mix now. So I've literally just poured some of this into onto the plate. Gonna add a little bit of glycerol. So, and I'm literally just quickly mixing that up with my finger. Done. If anybody can hear that weird noise in the background, by the way, it's the dog snoring on the sofa. So, there's my pipe cleaner. So I've literally just, let me just lift that up. So I've just got the plate there, and I'm literally just putting that in flat, letting the bubble solution soak in. And now that has got a bubble film in it. So one thing noting is when you do this, you want to try and make sure that the square is as flat as possible. Because if the square is not flat, again, it's going to impact your depth of field. So let's just pop this under here. Oh, right, there we go. We have the colours already. So, let me just take this off here. I think I can flick the camera around. Yep. So, now if I come under here now, can you see the soap film colours there? So I mean that's what I'm sort of getting off my phone. Let me go even closer. I don't know if you can see it, it's all starting to move around there as well. So straight away we've got some pretty interesting. I'm having to hold it in at an angle there. I might have to just adjust that because I've got the books reflecting. So that's one thing to look out at there. So you see how fast it's moving around there now? So this is why we really need to think about the shutter speed itself. So let me come back out of there. Flick the camera back round. Let's go into here. Back on there. Right. Cool. So just a couple of... Oh, it's doing some really groovy stuff in there now. So... one thing is key. I don't know if you can see in the middle here, the soap film is not, you can't have it at 90 degrees. Basically, the film does have to be at a bit of an angle. If it's not at a bit of an angle, when the light comes down, as the light passes through the soap films and it produces all of these crazy colours, if you hold it vertical, you can't see the colours. In fact, let me just... take this back off. The easiest way is just to demo that again. So flick this back round. So here we can see the colours, but if I change the angle of this to vertical, boom, all the colours have disappeared. Move it back to a slight angle and the colours have come back again. Not quite there. Yeah, I need both hands to move it back into position. But what you will find is you have to fiddle around a little bit with the angle to get that right. So turn that back round. Now, some of you are probably instantly thinking now, well, he was talking about depth of field and he was talking about shallow depth of field with macro lenses. And that is entirely true. So because you're going to be... we're going to be photographing in like this, and we have altered the angle of the soap film, you're not going to get a perfect you're not. It's quite tricky to get a lot of it in focus, basically, and it's moving, so you can't stack it. So you wouldn't want to be doing this photography at f2.8, for example, because at f2.8 that's going to give you a shallower depth of field. So we're probably going to be shooting at around f8, something like that, which is going to give us a bigger depth of field, and therefore more of that soap film will be in focus. Polarizing filter, question mark. Well, it just so happens I have a polarizing filter in that camera bag over there, so I'm going to just run and grab it and see what happens, because I have no idea what would happen if we use a polarizing filter on this. That soap film's still going. So literally, so this is a circular polarizer. Oh, bubble's gone. So the film doesn't last for that long. So you saw there what it was going for a couple of minutes. So the answer to the polarizing filter, it didn't seem to be doing that much of an impact. It maybe did make the colours look a little bit sort of bloop. But as you saw, I didn't get very long to deal with it. So, what I'm going to do now, let's just move this a little bit further away so I can get the camera in. So I'm going to start getting the camera ready, and I'm going to adjust where this light is a little bit as well, so I can move this. Move that further forward. So before I put more soap film in there, I'm going to start to do just some adjustments with the camera. So the first thing we can see here is the tripod is way too high. So I'm going to bring the tripod down. I don't know how much of you have done outdoor photography, macro photography with cameras and tripods. But one of the biggest challenges I always find with macro photography and using tripods is just getting the tripod into the right position in the first place. So if I'm out in the field and I found, you know, some stunning dragonfly on a morning and it's there on a reed, you know, the angle you have the camera on is really important. And yeah, just getting the camera at the right height, etc., can be, you know, can take some time. Cool. Right, I'm just going to move that bubble mix over that way. So so rather than me sort of putting some soap film in there and then it's me taking 2 minutes to get the camera into the right height, I'm going to get the camera at the right height straight away. So. Format the card as well. Oh, no, I don't want to format the card because I took some pictures of an interesting cloud and a crescent moon last night, and I haven't put those onto my computer yet. So, setting straight away. So any camera system that you're using, if you put it onto a tripod, first thing always to do is to turn the stabilizer off. So on this camera there's a stabilizer switch just over here, and we turn that off. So if I was doing this handheld, I would have the stabilizer on, but the stabilizer works as like a gyroscope inside the lens. And if you're shooting on a tripod and you have the stabilizer on, it can create some unnecessary movement with the camera. So we're going to turn that off. So, and then I'm just going to stick live view on just to, let me see if I can move this so you get a view of the back of the camera. So I'll often be using live view to just get me in the right place. Just move that a little bit. So still too high. So that's getting about right, and I can see there, I don't know if you can see it on here, it's quite tricky with that light on. Let me just, if I flick the light off, it's probably going to be too dark. Yeah, it's going to be too dark. If you see on the back of the camera, we've still got the edges of the of it in there. But as I move to minimum focus and distance, that goes away. So now that's basically just black. So when I put the soap film in there, we should get to a point where all we see is just soap film and not any of the edges. Now, if it's worth having this bit of a discussion just now, if you were using a different camera system, where did I put my... So here I've got a Canon M5, which is my sort of walkabout camera. If I'm going out for a big hike or I'm out mountaineering, this is a camera I take with me. But if if you've got something like this, which has got a smaller sensor and maybe not a macro lens, so this lens is 18 to 150. The way to maximise the size of your subject in the frame, so either to get to the point where all you can see is soap film, or to make that as big as the pipe cleaners as big as possible in the actual image, what I would do is I would move the lens to sort of the maximum focal length. On this one it would be 150 millimeters, and then I would turn the focus system off. And then I would just manually move the focus ring till it gets to the minimum focus and distance. And then I'd go backwards and forwards till I'd check that I've got the subject in focus. And that's going to make, if you do that, move the lens to the maximum focal length, and then manually move the lens to the minimum focus and distance, that's going to make that's going to be as big as you can get the subject in the frame. So I hope that makes sense. And if I had some extension tubes on there, again, that would get it a little bit closer again. So you don't necessarily have to be using a macro lens for this, but a macro lens is going to let you get in there closer. So let's move the soap film over here. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to prep another soap film. So stick that into the solution. I'm just doing this as a live demonstration, so I may not get the most perfect of results straight away, but obviously if you're doing this at home, you can fiddle around to your heart's content. Let's just move this clamp a little bit. So let me just move that to, just need to move the camera out of the way a bit. There we go. Actually, right, loads of colours there. So, so live view back. So I've got an active film in there now. So I'm going to move the ISO up pretty high for this, just because I've not got a chance to fiddle around with the light that much. I'm going to put it up to f8 to give me a bigger depth of field. So I'm moving the camera forward. Cool, right, we're getting there. So let's move this so you can... In fact, I'm going to take this off and... There we go. Flip the camera around. So this is the back of my live view now. So literally it's quite bonkers really to think this is live view of the back of my camera. So I'm going to just move this around to so this is why it was easy for me to have a focus rail. So let me show you the settings. Good question, Stephanie. ISO. So because it's mirrored the I'm just gonna have to tell you. So I'm on ISO 3200, f8 and 125th of a second. But you can see now why I could never possibly stack this, and why you're always going to need a relatively quick shutter speed, even though we're on a tripod, because you go back a little bit more, because I was going to say it's showing more out of focus than it was because the phone wasn't focusing. But I mean, you can see there, just streaming it off my iPhone in my front room, it's going pretty bonkers there, which is again why you can do some really nice movie clips of this as well. So it doesn't just have to be stills. Now, you could put more light up here. You could use 2 lamps, or you could move this closer to the soap film itself. The more light you put in there, the more you could drop the ISO. But let's start and try and take some pictures. Oh, soap film popped there again. So. But yeah, it's very, very Austin Powers. So what I'm going to do now is, so that sort of means, we've got roughly the right settings. We've got everything set up. So next time I'm going to try and take some pictures. Eileen, would you do continuous shots? I would actually, yeah. And this leads me to another point really, which isn't just macro photography, it's any type of photography. So the reason I would do continuous shots is, you saw there, it was all moving. Now, because you have no idea what's going to happen with that soap film, and at which point the most interesting compositions are going to pop up. So I would do continuous shooting, and then I would look through the images that I'd taken, and just try to pull out the ones which were most pleasing to the eye compositionally. And I mean, if I relate that back to shooting you might do outside, this last winter I was working up in Abisko in northern Sweden, working up there as an aurora photography guide, Arctic landscapes, etc. And there's a huge lake there called Lake Tornatresk, this 74-kilometre lake. And some days you got these really big waves on the lake. I mean, it looked more like a sea than it did a lake. And I would go out and I would pick a view which I thought was an interesting composition, but I never knew exactly when these waves were going to break and be at their best, and which was going to give me the best arrangement of colours. So again, I'd shoot that on high speed continuous, which is a bit similar to this. So I'd end up with a lot of images, and yeah, I'm not going to use all of them by any means, but I'd be using high speed continuous just to try and break the unpredictability of what I was seeing, and hopefully maximise my chances of getting a good shot. So I think it's a really good question, because it relates to lots of different types of photography. It's a bit like if you were taking portraits of kids, etc., and they're playing around. It's good to do that on high speed continuous, because you never quite know when they're going to be at the most interesting. So prep another soap film here. One thing with this is it does get a little bit messy sometimes, so I have paper towel ready in case I do any major spillage. Typically it's not showing quite as well. Let's have a look. That's better. So, one thing I do find, so right, I've got my soap film in there now. It's all starting to go a bit groovy. Do you know what? I am going to leave an edge of the pipe cleaner in there, just because I'm going to show you that, cropping it doesn't really make that much difference. One thing you'll find when you start doing this is you'll notice some of the patterns sort of copy along. So at the moment it's moving quite slowly. What I'm going to do now as well is I'm just going to digitally zoom in and try and fine-tune the focus. At roughly the middle. Okay, and I'm going to go I'm just going to go up to F9 and drop it to 100th of a second. So the settings I've got on there is ISO 3200, 100th of a second and F9 to try and increase my depth of field. And let's just put it onto high speed continuous. Oh, now you see, I've done all that, and then the most interesting bits are a little bit further over this way. Which is what I'm just fine tuning things again a bit. Zooming in there, fine tuning the focus. Right, let's do some shooting. Cool, so let's just have a quick, yeah, that looks looking pretty nice and sharp. Oh, and the bubbles popped. So, for some reason those ones aren't lasting that long. But all we're really wanting to do at this stage is get some sample images and show you what they look like. Stephen, what type of metering am I using? I would use evaluative metering for that, just because it's the whole frame that's there. And then, I mean, when I looked at the exposure meter, it was bang in the middle. But what I sometimes find when I'm doing macro photography anyways, if I'm photographing something which has a lot of black in the image or a lot of white in the image, you have to be quite adaptive with how you look at the exposure meter. And sometimes with this, there is a lot of dark in the image, so sometimes it will look like it's underexposing where it not necessarily is. So I would always sort of check on live view as to how things are looking as well. So, right, how are we doing for time, by the way? 11:16. How on earth has that happened? So, let me grab the memory card from here. Move that polarizer out of the way, turn that lamp off, move that soap somewhere I don't stand in it, and let's readjust this tripod. I can't believe it's 11:16 already. What I want to do now, once I've just got this adjusted, is just put a couple of those images onto my Mac, and we'll just have a quick look at them. Let's go a little bit higher again. Pull that down a bit. Yeah, if you'd have said to me in February, while I was guiding 200 kilometres north of the Arctic Circle, taking people out to photograph northern lights, etc. If you'd have asked me, do you think you'll be doing Facebook Live events in May in your front room, streaming video demonstrations, my answer would have been no. So let's get this open. So memory card, stick that in the memory card reader there. Yeah. File. So I'm just going to do all of this in Lightroom, but obviously you know, just edit these in whichever software you're comfortable editing them with. Let me just uncheck those. Oh, this is macro photography I was doing yesterday morning. I found a robber fly and a spider together, all covered in dew. So I was using a very similar setup to what I was just using there. And there was my moon and funky cloud, but that's not what we want to be looking at, so let's just grab these. Import. So, I said these are probably not going to be perfect. Yeah, this was me sort of doing a live demonstration in the front room, so I can see straight away, even though the bit I had focused on quite a lot of the rest of it is not in focus. But let's just have a quick flick through, and yeah, something like that's going to give me something to play with. So develop. So I am going to crop into this. I mean, I'm using a 5D Mark IV, so they are huge files, 6,720 pixels wide by 4,480 pixels high. So I mean, I've got a lot of pixels to crop with there. I'll let the positive lockdown where you're able to get to see. Oh well, thank you very much, Eileen. So let's just crop in there a bit, because that's going to increase the amount of the image which is in focus. So so this bit here is in focus. Here it's dropping out of focus, which, you know, is not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing. The other thing I would always do straight away is enable profile corrections down here in Lightroom. So it just takes any known faults to do with any lens, and then applies them to that image. Really simple. And I mean, how much editing would you need to do to that, really? I mean, if I just be really lazy and press Command and U and see what Lightroom does, actually did quite a nice job. It's just pushed the shadows a bit, which I don't think we necessarily need. It's dropped the highlights. So you know, you can just move any of these sliders around and see if that gives you a desired impact. You know, you could add a little bit of clarity. Lightroom actually looked at that and thought that the image was too saturated, so it dropped the saturation to -4. So let's just put that back to 0 to get the colours as they were. And voila, sort of, there you have it, really. We have gone from pipe cleaner to psychedelic, crazy type image. You know, it's, yeah, don't, if your lens means you can, you know, you can't get to the point where you're just on this bit, you know, either have a go at making the square bigger, or just crop like I did there. And other key things to think about, I mean, if I take it right back to the beginning, make sure you have enough shutter speed so that movement is going to be sharp. And, you know, just test that, try it. You know, I mean, I would generally say, if it's not moving around very quickly, you know, you may get away with a 60th and 80th of a second, but probably more like a 100th. What I have found is the longer the soap film is in there, the quicker the colours start moving. Now, what you might find is you focused it using live view, and you sort of thought, right, that everything that looked really in focus. But when you look at the images, they're not sharp, and if that's the case, you didn't have enough shutter speed. So, you know, repeat with a faster shutter speed. The beauty of this is you can just, you know, you're doing it in your front room, you can just practice look. You know, here on this one, this stuff over here is totally sharp, so I definitely had enough shutter speed there. But the focus is dropping off here, but that's just going to be, I probably should have set the focus more to this area here, and I could have had more of the image in focus. I have a feeling that when I was looking in there, as well as tipping it, let me move that way, sort of that way, so I could get the angle of the light right. I have a feeling I also tipped it that way, which is why the depth of field is dropping off here. But, you know, that's the beauty of doing these things in your front room, is you can just keep, you know, repeating, checking. What I would do if I was doing this myself is I would have done that, waited till it popped, then I would have zoomed into the back of the camera and had a look. I wouldn't necessarily have taken the card out and stuck onto the computer to check. I would have just checked it on the back of the camera, and I'd just rinse and repeat until I'd got exactly the desired results that I wanted. Like I mentioned before as well, I have done some movie clips of this as well, which they are really cool to do. I mean, I've stuck one on my YouTube. I'm just Oliver Wright on YouTube, and I put one of those on there. I should do a couple more and put some psychedelic music to it, because it's really quite mesmerising. But let's see how we're doing for time. 11:23. So I think I've covered everything I needed to do on the soap films. But let's just back up to the other stuff. So yeah, I'm gonna do another one of these with CameraWorld on the 9th of June, same time, and on that one we're going to talk about macro stacking. So what I will do there is I'll talk about what macro stacking is, i.e. taking multiple images where the depth of field has moved, and then stacking them together. So I'll talk about what it is, what equipment you would need. Again, you really don't need much equipment. We'll do a demonstration probably on my tried and trusted J-Feather, and I'll sort of do that on the desk here in front. You can see exactly how I do it, because I do a lot of this handheld stacking, and the reason I do a lot of handheld stacking, because traditionally people sort of do it in a tripod, is I photograph a lot of subjects that move. I'm just trying to find, yeah, so let me bring up this image I took last week. Let me just move you a bit closer. So, oh no, it's made that more overexposed. What are you doing that for? There we go, that's better. So this is a zebra jumping spider, and it's just predated a fly. So zebra jumping spider, it's just predated a fly, and you know, it's not staying still. If I tried to set up a tripod, etc., just like I had then, it wouldn't have worked. So this is why I do handheld stacking a lot. If I just go to the next image, which is a crop of there, you can see there really is a bonkers amount of detail. So that's what we're going to be covering on the 9th of June. We'll go through all of the techniques you need to be able to do that, basically. So, and again, you know, lockdown is a funny time in the sense of we can practice a lot of these skills at home, on the desk, get the skills up and running, and then when you're out back in the field, you can practice all those skills that you learn. And just to recap, so massive thanks to CameraWorld and Canon for inviting me here this morning and talking you through this. So hopefully it's covered a couple of sort of macro basics you need to think about, and you will put my brain back in gear, cover a couple of the macro basics, but also just an interesting one with the soap films you can practice at home. And just to remind you, so CameraWorld have very kindly put up free prizes for this competition. So they will set up a little Facebook thread going where you can practice this, and you can post your best pictures on there. I mean, I would just limit it to a couple of pictures per person. But there are going to be £50, £30 and £20 prizes respectively of vouchers that you can spend at CameraWorld. And I think that pretty much covers everything, and we are at 11:27. So yeah, I hope that has been useful. If you want to find me online, I have a website, Oliver Wright Photography, dead easy to find, and from there there's sort of links through to my YouTube, Twitter, etc. And yeah, great. Well, it was really good to see that I had an audience all the way through that. The postman didn't arrive, the dog didn't start barking, and my application didn't crash. So cheers everybody. Like I say, if you have any additional questions, just add them onto this, or you know, send me a message or CameraWorld a message, and I will see you on the 9th of June for those of you who want to go through the camera stacking side of things. Thank you very much. Cheers and goodbye.